Step out of the vehicle, now.
Officer, I provided my license. What is the reason for this stop?
I said step out. Don't argue with me.
I'm not resisting. I'm asking a lawful question.
Hands on the hood. Do it.
I do not consent to any searches.
You don't decide that.
The blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror at exactly 2:17 in the afternoon on what should have been a completely ordinary Tuesday. Captain Diane Harris had just finished a quick lunch between shifts and was driving back to Fire Station 12 when Officer Ray Coleman decided to pull her over. What happened next would expose a corrupt cop, destroy a career built on abuse of power, and lead to one of the largest civil rights settlements in state history. Captain Diane Harris had spent 15 years climbing the ranks of the city fire department. She was the first black woman ever to reach captain in her district, a title she did not receive. She earned it through sleepless nights, burning buildings, collapsed rooftops, and moments that would break most people. Diane Harris showed up every single time. At 44 years old, she had responded to thousands of emergency calls. She had pulled people out of burning cars with her bare hands. She had led her crew through situations that would make most people run in the opposite direction. She was respected by her firefighters, admired by her supervisors, and loved by the communities she served. Off duty, she lived simply. She drove a clean pickup truck, owned a modest home near the station, and had never received so much as a parking ticket in her entire adult life. That Tuesday afternoon, she was still wearing her official department shirt with the fire department patch clearly visible on her sleeve. Nothing about her driving was erratic or suspicious. She was traveling 5 miles under the speed limit, using her turn signals correctly and following every single traffic law. She was doing everything right. But none of that mattered to Officer Coleman. Ray Coleman had been with the police department for 9 years. On paper, he looked like a decent cop. A few commendations, mostly acceptable performance reviews, and a reputation as someone who got results. But what his supervisors either didn't know or quietly chose to ignore was that Coleman had developed a deeply troubling pattern. He had a habit of targeting successful black professionals. He seemed to take a particular kind of pleasure in stopping, humiliating, and arresting people who had achieved far more than he ever would. It was as if their success offended him personally. When Coleman spotted Captain Harris driving through downtown in her truck that afternoon, something triggered his worst instincts. Maybe it was her confident posture. Maybe it was the pride in the way she carried herself. Maybe it was simply the fact that she was a successful black woman who looked like she belonged, and that bothered him deeply. Whatever the reason, he made a decision in that moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The traffic stop was aggressive from the very first second. Coleman approached her driver's side window with his hand resting on his weapon, a move that immediately struck Captain Harris as unnecessary and intimidating. She had responded to enough dangerous situations on the job to know when someone was looking for trouble rather than doing their job. Coleman asked for her license and registration without explaining why he had stopped her in the first place. Captain Harris calmly provided both documents and politely asked what violation she had committed. Coleman ignored her question entirely, turned around, walked back to his patrol car, and left her sitting there for nearly 20 full minutes. During those 20 minutes, Coleman ran her information through every database he had access to. He was searching for anything: an outstanding warrant, an unpaid fine, a suspended license, anything at all that would give him a reason to escalate the situation against this woman who clearly wasn't intimidated by him. He found absolutely nothing. Her record was spotless. No warrants, no ampad no traffic violations of any kind. Her license was current, her registration was valid, and her insurance was fully up to date. Captain Diane Harris was as clean as they come. Coleman was frustrated, but he wasn't finished. When Coleman returned to her truck, his entire demeanor had changed. He was more aggressive, more confrontational. He ordered Captain Harris out of the vehicle. She asked why, calmly and clearly, and stated that she had provided all requested documents and had committed no violations. Coleman raised his voice and repeated the command. Captain Harris complied, but before she stepped out, she did something that would prove absolutely crucial to everything that followed. She activated the voice recorder on her phone, which was still sitting in her center console cup holder. Everything that happened next was captured in crystal clear audio. Coleman ordered her to place her hands on the hood of the truck. She asked again what violation had prompted this stop. He told her to be quiet and do as she was told. His language became increasingly aggressive and completely inappropriate for what should have been a routine traffic stop. Then Coleman made his first major mistake. He began searching her purse without her consent and without any probable cause. Captain Harris clearly and calmly stated that she did not consent to any searches and asked whether he had a warrant. Coleman laughed and said he didn't need her permission or a warrant. As he rifled through her belongings, Coleman found her official fire department captain's badge and her city-issued identification card. Most officers, at that exact moment, would have immediately stepped back, recognized the gravity of their mistake, and apologized. Most officers would have handed everything back and moved on. Not Coleman. Instead, he accused her of carrying a fake badge and impersonating a fire captain. He claimed she was committing fraud. Captain Harris calmly told him to call the fire station and verify her identity himself. Coleman's response revealed absolutely everything about who he really was. He said he didn't care who she thought she was. She was going to learn some respect. Handcuffed in broad daylight, Coleman handcuffed Captain Diane Harris and placed her in the back of his patrol car, in full view of bystanders on a busy downtown street, in the middle of the afternoon. She remained calm and professional even as her constitutional rights were being violated in plain sight. She asked to speak to his supervisor. He told her to be quiet. She asked for his badge number. He ignored her. What Coleman didn't realize was that while he thought he was in control of the situation, Captain Harris was quietly cataloging every single illegal action he was taking. Every inappropriate comment. Every constitutional violation. Every lie. She had been in dangerous situations before. She knew how to stay calm under pressure. And she knew that the moment she was free, she was going to make sure the world heard exactly what had happened. The arrest was completely fabricated. Coleman claimed she had been driving erratically, but his own dashcam footage would later prove that was a total lie. He claimed she was belligerent and uncooperative, but the audio recording on her phone proved she had been polite and fully compliant throughout the entire encounter. He claimed she had resisted arrest, but multiple witnesses who watched the whole thing from the sidewalk would later testify that she never resisted anything. Coleman transported Captain Harris to the county jail, where the booking process became even more humiliating. He told the intake officers that she was a career criminal who had been impersonating a fire captain. He pushed them to add identity fraud and impersonation charges on top of the traffic violations he had already invented. But here's where things started to fall apart for Coleman. The intake officers, who were actually competent at their jobs, immediately sensed something was off. They had processed enough real criminals to recognize that Captain Harris didn't fit any profile they had ever seen. Her composure, her speech, the way she spoke about her rights with calm authority, everything about her told them she was exactly who she claimed to be. One of the intake officers quietly contacted Fire Station 12 while Coleman was filling out paperwork. Within 30 minutes, the station confirmed everything. Captain Diane Harris was a 15-year veteran of the city fire department, currently serving as a fully active fire captain, and she had been expected back at the station over an hour ago. The jail supervisor, a veteran officer with 25 years on the job, immediately understood the magnitude of what had just happened. A police officer had illegally arrested an innocent woman, a decorated public servant, on completely fabricated charges. This wasn't just misconduct. This was career suicide. The supervisor quietly approached Coleman and suggested they release Captain Harris immediately, apologize, and put this whole thing behind them. Coleman, either too arrogant or too foolish to understand the situation he was in, refused. He insisted she was a criminal and demanded they complete the full booking process. That's when the supervisor picked up the phone and made the calls that would end Ray Coleman's career forever. He called the police chief. He called the district attorney. And he called the FBI field office. Within an hour, the jail was swarming with investigators, internal affairs officers, and federal agents. Captain Harris was released immediately, with profuse apologies from everyone present. Everyone except Coleman, who continued to insist even as federal agents surrounded him, that he had done absolutely nothing wrong. She was offered medical attention and counseling. She politely declined and asked for copies of every report and every recording related to her arrest. What followed would make Coleman wish he had chosen a very different profession. The FBI opened a civil rights investigation within hours of the incident. The police department launched its own internal affairs investigation. The district attorney's office began reviewing every single case Coleman had ever been involved in, and Captain Harris retained one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the state. The evidence against Coleman was overwhelming from the start. The dashcam footage showed Captain Harris driving carefully and lawfully. The audio recording captured every illegal search, every fabricated accusation, and every inappropriate comment. Multiple eyewitnesses confirmed that she had been cooperative and professional throughout the entire encounter. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered something far more disturbing than a single bad traffic stop. Coleman had a pattern, a long, well-documented, deliberate pattern. Over the previous 4 years, he had made dozens of questionable stops and arrests, nearly all of them involving successful black men and women. Black doctors, black attorneys, black business owners, black educators, people who had worked hard, achieved something meaningful, and were simply going about their lives. The police department's own records revealed that Coleman arrested black drivers at a rate 5 times higher than white drivers, even though he worked the same neighborhoods and the same shifts as his colleagues. His arrest reports were frequently inaccurate. In some cases, they were completely made up. 19 citizen complaints had been filed against him. Every single one had been dismissed without a proper investigation. Internal Affairs then discovered something that made everyone's blood run cold. Coleman had bragged to fellow officers about targeting what he called uppity people. He had made openly racist comments in the locker room. He had even kept a personal scorecard of how many suits he had managed to humiliate. And some of those colleagues had said nothing. As the civil rights lawsuit took shape, Captain Harris's attorney, a formidable litigator named Angelique Carter, who had won over $200 million in police misconduct settlements nationwide, began interviewing the people Coleman had targeted over the years. She found 38 of them. Their stories were remarkably, heartbreakingly similar. A prominent surgeon described how Coleman had pulled him over while he was rushing to perform emergency surgery. Coleman forced him to stand in the rain for over an hour while he searched his car with no probable cause. The surgeon missed the surgery. A patient's life hung in the balance because of a traffic stop built on nothing. A young attorney described being arrested in front of her 2 children after she calmly questioned why Coleman was searching her car. She spent 6 hours in jail before the charges were quietly dropped without explanation. A restaurant owner described being handcuffed outside his own building after Coleman claimed he looked suspicious walking around the property. The man had been checking on his own restaurant, as he did every single night for over 12 years. The pattern was undeniable. And attorney Carter used every single story to build an airtight case, not just against Coleman, but against the entire system that had covered for him, enabled him, and rewarded him for years. The lawsuit filed 4 months later was a legal masterpiece. It didn't just target Coleman for his actions at that traffic stop. It went after the entire police department for creating and maintaining a culture of racial discrimination. It named Coleman, his direct supervisor, the police chief, and the city itself as defendants. The trial lasted 5 weeks and became a national media story. Every day, the courthouse was packed with reporters, civil rights advocates, and community members who came to watch justice in action. Captain Harris testified for 2 full days. Speaking in the same steady, composed voice she used to direct her firefighters in emergency situations, she described in careful detail every illegal action Coleman had taken. She explained clearly and specifically how his behavior had violated her constitutional rights. She described the emotional weight of being handcuffed and jailed like a criminal despite having done absolutely nothing wrong. But her most powerful moment came when she looked directly at the jury and said this: "What happened to me happens to people every single day who don't have a phone recording or a lawyer on speed dial. They just disappear into the system. I'm here because I had the resources to fight back. This trial is for every single person who didn't. The courtroom was completely silent. Coleman takes the stand and falls apart. When Coleman took the stand in his own defense, the result was a disaster. Under cross-examination by Attorney Carter, he contradicted himself repeatedly. He couldn't clearly explain why he had stopped Captain Harris in the first place. He couldn't justify the warrantless search of her belongings. He couldn't produce a single piece of evidence to support any of the charges he had filed against her. When Carter pressed him about his documented pattern of targeting black professionals, Coleman became defensive and visibly angry. He denied being racist, while simultaneously making comments that revealed exactly how he viewed successful black people. Then Carter played a recording from his own body camera during a previous arrest, one the department had tried to bury. In the recording, Coleman's voice was unmistakable. He could be heard saying, "These people think their degrees make them better than us. I'll show them who really has the power here." The color drained from Coleman's face. His attorney objected. The judge overruled. The jury had heard it, and they would not forget it. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. They found Officer Ray Coleman liable on every single count. They found the police department liable for creating an environment that enabled and protected his behavior. They found supervisors liable for ignoring 19 citizen complaints without investigation. The final settlement totaled $6.2 million. But the money was only part of what Coleman lost that day. The criminal investigation that ran parallel to the civil trial resulted in federal charges for civil rights violations and falsifying official police records. Coleman was convicted on multiple counts. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. He lost his badge. He lost his pension. He lost his home. His family fell apart during the trial. And his name, the name he had once used to intimidate and humiliate innocent people, became a symbol of exactly the kind of officer no department ever wants to produce. The police department was placed under a federal consent decree requiring 10 years of federal oversight, mandatory retraining, and sweeping changes to how citizen complaints are reviewed and investigated. Captain Diane Harris returned to Fire Station 12. She didn't retire. She didn't step back. She went back to work because that's who she is. But she also used her platform and her settlement to establish a civil rights legal fund for working-class black professionals who face police misconduct but don't have the resources to fight back. She testified before a state legislative committee that used her case to draft new accountability legislation for law enforcement. And she became a voice, steady, calm, and impossible to ignore, for the thousands of people whose stories never make the news. Coleman's choice to pull over Captain Harris that Tuesday afternoon cost him absolutely everything. His prison sentence, his destroyed family, his lost pension, his permanent disgrace. All of it stemmed from a single moment when he decided that a successful black woman needed to be put in her place. He had used his badge like a weapon for years, terrorizing innocent citizens while his department looked the other way. He had mistaken silence for permission and privilege for power. Captain Harris's $6.2 million victory sent a clear, unmistakable message. Accountability will find officers who abuse their power, no matter how long it takes. Her courage to fight back exposed not just one corrupt cop, but an entire system of failure, and changed the way police misconduct is investigated and prosecuted across the state. Coleman learned too late that in the age of phone recordings, federal oversight, and people who refuse to stay quiet, racism comes with consequences that some people simply cannot afford to pay. The blue lights that flashed in Captain Harris's rearview mirror that Tuesday afternoon didn't just signal a traffic stop. They marked the beginning of the end for a man who believed he was untouchable, and the beginning of something far more powerful for a woman who refused to let injustice have the last word. Justice was served, but the work of rebuilding trust between communities and law enforcement continues every single day.